Welcome to NVC Life. I'm Rachelle Lamb, veteran NVC trainer and relationship coach, helping listeners navigate interpersonal conflict and ground more deeply into relational living. Greetings, fellow humans. A few weeks ago, a listener reached out to me with a question around the link between epigenetics and nonviolent communication. He had watched a 17-minute video of a TED Talk given by Professor Moshe Ziff in 2016, who is recognized as a pioneering geneticist and researcher at McGill University. The title of his talk was Epigenetics, Our Body's Way to Change the Destiny Written in Our DNA. I will include a link in the show notes. And here's what the listener wrote to me. Ziff's talk challenged a lot of my understanding of what Dr. Rosenberg taught regarding how no one can make you feel anything, that our feelings are a byproduct of our perspectives and interpretations of what is happening, and that how we manage our thinking can prevent a lot of our trauma. This epigenetics research clearly seems to show that how people treat others does indeed deeply affect us, right down to our DNA, literally changing us all the time regardless of how we think and perceive things. Which also would appear to imply that the trauma stored in our genetic memory could be easily corrected within only a couple of generations of being exposed to a social structure where stress is not a factor, such as an NVC school, society, and culture. So I find this somewhat confusing. Are these opposing views? Does our thinking affect our epigenetics? Or are our genetics affected immediately upon an interaction and our thinking is merely always playing catch-up and damage control? How would you interpret this epigenetics research? And what implications does this research have to the perspectives of NVC to you? I would really love to hear your thoughts on this matter. Best regards. So thank you to the listener who sent this to me. I have to admit straight away that I'm not qualified to respond authoritatively to the question. I've read about epigenetics and I'm fascinated by the subject, but I would not be able to say conclusively whether or not our thinking affects our epigenetics. I just don't know. I would suspect, however, that it does, given the generally accepted understanding that our brains are malleable. I'm not going to get scientific around the subject, though, since it's outside of my wheelhouse. I can, however, take some time to elaborate on the piece where the listener writes that Dr. Rosenberg taught that no one can make you feel anything, that our feelings are a byproduct of our perspectives and interpretations of what is happening, and that how we manage our thinking can prevent a lot of our trauma. I'll start with the second sentence, that our feelings are a byproduct of our perspectives and interpretations of what is happening, and that how we manage our thinking can prevent a lot of our trauma. I would support that line of thinking. I do believe that as adults, our feelings arise largely, but not always, as we'll see in a few minutes, as a result of what we hold dear, what we believe, and what we expect. If we are parents, for instance, and we believe that a child should never say no to us, then we are likely to feel angry or frustrated when our child says no. If, on the other hand, we believe that children have a right to say no, the mere openness to that possibility will lead to greater flexibility in terms of how we respond to the child's no. So yes, our belief system, our lens, our biases play a significant role in how we respond and hence how we feel. I would describe it as a mutual dance where feelings exist in concert with needs, beliefs, and thoughts, and vice versa. Let's have a look at the first sentence. Dr. Rosenberg taught that no one can make you feel anything. Okay, so I've heard this before, and I'm sure listeners have who have studied Marshall Rosenberg's work. Here's something for listeners to know. Marshall spoke quite provocatively at times. I would describe it as a way of speaking that was highly effective at breaking spells, interrupting the status quo, compelling people to reconsider deeply held beliefs and reimagine what was possible. And I will make a disclaimer that since Marshall isn't here to confirm or disconfirm my own perspectives on this matter, I am certainly not speaking on his behalf, nor should what I say be perceived as the truth on the matter. I'm simply relaying my own experiences with Marshall as well as what makes sense to me. And here's something to know about me. For better or for worse, I've never been someone who believes things are true based on what a research study reveals in controlled environments. I'm more interested in real people's stories and the simple observations I've made by watching how people engage, because it turns out that people are actually quite predictable. Nurture a child, for instance, and that child will respond favorably to you. Threaten or punish a child, you'll witness withdrawing and avoidant behavior from that child. I personally find those kinds of observations more compelling than double-blind studies. They take me to the root of life, so to speak, where the umbilical cord, breast milk, and constancy of touch is more trustworthy than the distance eye that has already been taught separation by the crib and the pacifier. By that, I'm not discounting scientifically driven studies. I'm only saying that my studying eye works differently, that I'm most interested in what separation from earth skin and mother skin has done to us and our ability to live in mutual accord with life. Still, let's explore the notion that no one can make you feel anything. Is that true? Think of the first time you fell in love. Recall the moment when your heart raced and you had butterflies in your stomach. Is it true that the object of your desire didn't make you feel anything? According to science, there's a lot going on in a person's nervous system and hormonally. A person is flooded with dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline, and vasopressin. People feel euphoric, and they have absolutely no control over those feelings. So that's a bit of science. But how does poetry address falling in love? Here's Pablo Neruda. I want to do with you what spring does with cherry trees. And here's Shakespeare. So is mine eye enthralled to thy shape, and thy fair virtue's force perforce doth move me on the first view to say, to swear, I love thee. I suppose one could attribute all cause of feeling to the neural and hormonal activity that occurs within our own bodies, as well as particular thoughts and beliefs. I personally don't find that view altogether useful. Nor can I say that poetry provides reassuring answers, but it does plunge me into the vibrant, mysterious current of life, which I really appreciate. The question of what specifically causes feelings remains somewhat a mystery in the scenario I just described. And while it would be accurate to say that the beloved does not cause the feelings that arise when one falls in love, it would be equally true to say that those feelings would not have arisen without the beloved. So to return to NVC's views on feelings, I've heard plenty of criticism of NVC where a person will say something to the effect of, the understanding that a person is fully responsible for their own feelings actually further victimizes a person who has already been traumatized by their oppressor. And I certainly wouldn't disagree with the thinking that a parent grieving for a child who died as a result of warfare should be made to feel responsible for their sorrow. That's crazy. Here's an important word, context. Context is everything. While it's true that NVC encourages people to take responsibility for their feelings as well as their actions, it's not also true that Marshall would have applauded a person going home after a workshop and saying to their partner, what you're saying isn't my problem. I'm not responsible for your feelings. You are. Okay, I don't know if anybody's ever heard that, but I can tell you that people do say this. Taking responsibility for one's feelings doesn't absolve others from the role they play in the experience of others, which includes their feelings. We are interconnected. We have mirror neurons in our bodies, which means that we often pick up on how others are feeling around us. We can often guess with a high degree of accuracy how someone is feeling in our presence. And this is especially true when we've known the person for a while. Even before the person opens their mouth, we can guess if they are excited, anxious, grumpy, angry, hurt, etc. Now, I believe at the heart of the question I'm circling around here is a wondering about to what degree does what we say or do impact others and vice versa? And to what degree might a traumatic event that my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and anyone further up the family line, to what degree might such events register on me, on my children, and future generations? I don't actually know, but I think it would be fair to say that there is an impact. We can cite, for instance, the trauma that residential school survivors have endured among indigenous populations, or listen to Professor Ziff's talk on epigenetic mechanisms and transgenerational transmission of Jewish suffering in the context of the Holocaust. I don't doubt the veracity of those findings. As is the case for all complex subjects, deep exploration and deep discernment are necessary ingredients to making life-serving decisions. I think that the good life should be assessed first and foremost on the basis of whether one's choices are in service to all of life, not whether or not something works mainly for an individual personally, but whether or not it works for all people and all life, even after we are no longer living. How do the choices we make today impact future generations and the future of planet Earth? If it doesn't work for the planet, you can be sure it doesn't work for human life either. I also don't want to overlook the purpose of NVC, which, as I describe it, is to connect to life, to recognize the interconnectedness of all life, and to be of service. Okay. Let me say something about the Epigenetics TED Talk referenced at the beginning of this episode. Halfway through the video, Ziff speaks about some research conducted by a colleague who's been rearing monkeys in two different ways, randomly separating some monkeys from their mothers and rearing them with a nurse in surrogate motherhood conditions. So these monkeys didn't have a mother, they had a nurse, and the other group of monkeys were reared by their normal natural mothers. When the monkeys were older, they were completely different animals, Ziff says. The monkeys that had their original mothers didn't care about alcohol, nor were they sexually aggressive. The motherless monkeys, on the other hand, were aggressive, stressed, and alcoholics. He goes on to say, so we looked at their DNA early after birth to see, is it possible that the mother is marking? There is a signature of the mother in the DNA of the offspring. These are 14-day-old monkeys, and what you see here is the modern way by which we study epigenetics. We can now map those chemical marks, which we call methylation marks, on DNA. At a single nucleotide resolution, we can map the entire genome. We can now compare the monkey that had a mother to the one who didn't. And here's a visual presentation of this. He then loads a slide. What you see is the genes that got more methylated are red. The genes that got less methylated are green. You can see many genes are changing because not having a mother is not just one thing. It affects the whole way. It sends us signals about the whole way your world is going to look when you become an adult. I'm going to stop there and repeat the last part. Because not having a mother is not just one thing. It affects the whole way. It sends us signals about the whole way your world is going to look when you become an adult. In the video description, it says, the Ziff's lab is interested in understanding basic epigenetic mechanisms and their broad implications in human behavior, health, and disease, as well as in developing epigenetics-based therapeutics and diagnostics. Okay, so this is the kind of research that I'm glad others are drawn to because I'm simply not. What I personally find distressing is where the emphasis is placed on DNA methylation and the importance of tracking the changes that occur under stress. Fair enough, but what struck me was the glaring fact that the presence of one's mother and natural mothering itself hugely determines the whole way your world is going to look when you become an adult, as Ziff actually says in the video. That receives very little attention. Really taking this in would, in my opinion, help to fuel a revolution where mothering is concerned. There's no doubt that the way a child is mothered has enormous impact, that many of the traumas and attachment styles, mostly insecure and avoidant, that we hear so much about these days have to do with how we did or didn't bond with our mother, as well as whether or not our mother was actually able to be the kind of attuned mother that an infant would require in order to be wholly nourished and cared for. I would say that our modern lifestyles have more to do with maintaining the status quo of capitalism than to do with attuning to the infant's needs or to the needs of life. So I want to thank the listener who wrote to me with this well-wrought question. As you can hear in my response, more questions are raised than answers, which to me, at least, is the measure of a good question. As the poet Rilke wrote, "Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." Thank you for your question. Thank you for tuning into NVC Life. For future episodes, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. For free resources or to book a private session with me, head over to RachelleLamb.com. Until the next time, stay sane, grateful, and generous.